Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to visit the quote-unquote ghost town of Wingo, California. It's located in Sonoma County, and you park at the Larson Winery. You definitely should go in there and buy something if you can, buy a bottle of wine or check in, ask for permission to park if you want to be kind in that way. They were kind of closed when I went through, so I just went ahead and parked. And it's a little bit of a dicey hike at first, and then you bust out to these beautiful vineyards here. I think it's about 3 miles to make it to Wingo, but I want to tell you a little bit about the town before we get there. Wingo was booming in 1847, and at that time there was a steamer, I think it was a 37-footer, that took people from San Francisco to Wingo. And then I believe at Wingo you took a stagecoach. You could get anywhere in Sonoma from there. But of course this was before the Golden Gate Bridge, so ferry was the best way to travel. I think it was 1876 they tried to put in what they call the Prismoidal Railroad, and that's like a monorail. I don't even know if it was ever completed. I think it was a project that failed. And then in 1876, a proper 2-track railroad was installed. And from there, it became a little bit more efficient. You know, you just take the ferry to Wingo, then you jumped on the railroad and to take you anywhere in Sonoma. Okay, I should point out that the town wasn't always called Wingo. It was originally called Norfolk. And at some point the name was changed, and I don't know what year it was. If I figure that out, I'll put the year down below, but it definitely was called Norfolk and then converted to Wingo. But nobody knows why it was named Wingo. Some people theorize it has something to do with the wind because it can be super windy out there. So in the early 1900s, this place was known as not only as a stop-off point to get to Sonoma County, but also it was quite a fishing and duck hunting area. And the rumor has it that there was a 44-inch, 36-pound striped bass caught out here. By the 1970s, late 70s, the town was pretty much abandoned, and I think there was just one resident. And then she moved on, and then there was, I think, another guy that maybe still be there. But my understanding is that whoever is there doesn't want you there. You know, they just don't like the idea of tourists. They want you to stay out. So if you do come out here, you probably want to respect the places. I have no idea what I'm going to find. We're going to explore that together, if there's still somebody out there or not. Another thing I want to mention is a little bit of lore about a rather famous musician, at least in my mind, that wrote a couple of songs about Wingo. And his name is Norton Buffalo, and he's a harmonica player. And I know him well because when he was coming up in the 70s, I played harmonica and sang in a blues band back then. So I would go out and see Norton Buffalo at the clubs around the Bay Area, and he was amazing. He's most famously known for touring with Steve Miller, and he also did this amazing harmonica solo on a song by Bonnie Raitt when she did Runaway, and he played 4 harmonicas as the solo progressed. And he would, when he's playing live, he'd have them all kind of in his hands, and each time he finished with one harp, he'd just drop it on the ground and finish up. It was pretty cool. And after that, he became a solo artist, and he produced a couple of albums. I think on his second album, which was 1979, I believe the first one was 1978 maybe, but he had a song on there called High Tide in Wingo, and it's a train song, you know, the sort of harmonica train song. And the other song he produced later with his sidekick, Roy Rogers, who was a blues slide guitarist. And that one's called Ain't No Bread in the Bread Box. And I think maybe they did a video for that song, and they filmed it in Wingo.
There ain't no bread in the bread box.
That's his claim to fame. Norton Buffalo, unfortunately, came down with cancer and died a while back at the age of 58. But he was an amazing musician and showman, and I really enjoyed seeing him, so can't say enough good things about him. So if you have a chance, go look up those songs and maybe the video and see if you can find it. It's worth checking out. Now you might be wondering, when and why did Wingo become abandoned? And of course it has a lot to do with the completion of the Golden Gate Bridge in 1937. And of course by then a lot of people had cars, and it was, you know, if you wanted to go up to Sonoma County, you'd probably just take your car and have a drive, because, you know, once you're up there, it's a little bit hard to get around if you don't have a car. So taking the ferry and the train was not the most efficient way to do it. So after 1937 it began to decline, and then there was actually a fire in 1977 that destroyed a few cabins. but a lot of it still remains out there. And from what I understand, there's an old drawbridge out there that's really cool. We're going to check that out. I don't believe that's used anymore. However, my understanding is that freight trains still pass through there today. If you live out there, you're going to hear the train every once in a while. Okay, everybody, I've got a confession to make. This is actually my second try trying to get to Wingo. And I think there's been a couple of changes. I'm out on the marsh here, which they've converted to kind of a wildlife area. And that's the pump house right there. I'm going to point out two changes I think they've made. One is that you used to be able to drive right to the pump house, and there's a parking lot right next to it. So you could drive out there, park, and it was another 1.5 miles or so to Wingo. But now the road is closed, and there's some downed trees and some brush. And the road's very brushy. It'd be hard to drive anyway. So now you've got to walk it, so it's a longer hike. The other change is I think this whole area used to be levees, and that kept the water out so they could use it for agriculture. But now it's been converted to wetland wildlife area, marsh areas for bird life and whatnot. And Wingo is way over that way. When I got here last time, the road was completely inundated, and the tide was about +4 when I was here last time. The low tide today is going to be around 0, and it's probably about +1 now. And the road, as you can see, is still inundated right here. There's just this narrow little track, and I'm walking on that. And the other thing that I've done, I purchased these boots actually just specifically for this trip, and hopefully that'll make a difference. But as I look out there, that way, it's completely underwater. So we're just going to give it a try and see if we can make it. I am not confident that I'm going to make it, but I'm going to give it a try. I've got the boots so I can tolerate shallow water, and I think it's mostly pretty shallow. If it's not too mucky, then I've got a chance of making it. But if not, then the best I'm going to do is try to fly the drone over there and see if I can get some shots. You can see some bird life here right in front of me. I'll show it to you. Well, folks, I'm sad to say this, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to abort again. It's almost over my boots. And the only thing I can say is that all the accounts that I read of going to Wingo are from, like 5 to 10 years ago. And they all stated it was an easy walk, and nobody mentioned anything about the tides. They've broken down the levees and they've allowed the tide water to come in, which means it's no longer a viable hike. I think the tide right now is maybe +1. So maybe it's possible if you found a tide that was, -2 or 3 or 4, whatever, that it might be possible. But right now, it's not possible. So I'm going to go back to the pump house, the dry land, and I'm going to try to fly the drone over there. It's really too bad. I really wanted to make it to Wingo. On the left side of the frame, you can see the boat races parking lot, and in the foreground, that's the pump house. And we're going to show you the road that leads to Wingo. You can see it's dry until this point, and then you can see the little strip that I walked on. And then the road is that clear area. You'll see these brownish areas that might look like land, but those are actually deeper areas with stuff growing on the surface. So we're right on the road in this clear area in the middle left of the frame. And then you can see the road kind of curves to the right, but we're going to take more of a beeline to Wingo. And Wingo is over to the upper right there, where you see those 3 trees and a little building there, and you kind of can barely see the bridge, but we'll get closer and we'll show that to you. Okay, so here we skipped a little bit ahead. The road is over to the right, but with that levee that we're coming up to is actually the railroad easement, and you can see again Wingo in the upper right of the frame. So as we get closer to the railroad tracks, you can see that the rails are a little bit shiny, and I do believe that these are actually being used today, because usually on a railroad, when they're done using it, they take out the rails because they're pretty valuable, and then they'll just use them somewhere else. And so now we're coming along the railroad easement, and we're heading to Wingo. I had this idea that one way to walk to Wingo would be along the tracks, but I think they would probably try to kick you off because it's being used and it's private and could be a little bit dangerous to boot. So here the railroad track curves as we get close to Wingo, and as soon as we get around that tree there, the bridge is going to come into view. Now this old drawbridge was built many years ago, and it's very, very cool. The thing about it is that although it's still being used today, it's no longer being used as a drawbridge because nobody is sailing up the slough as they used to. And that's Wingo on the left there. You can just see a couple of buildings. But first we're going to cruise by the old bridge, the old drawbridge. It's very, very cool. And you can see the railroad tracks continue along the slough there. The astute viewer is going to notice some pretty nice roads there, and it looks like that's an easy way to get to Wingo. And there's some buildings up ahead that are obviously being used today. But unfortunately, that's private land. And although you can access Wingo from here, the owner of the private land will not allow you to get through. And it's pretty firm about it, so that's not a way to get to Wingo, even though you see these roads are obviously in pretty good shape and being used today. And here's a really nice shot of Wingo from above. So here's a nice shot of the town, and you can see the buildings that remain. And one thing you can notice also is the wood pathways that go to the buildings. I think that White House might be the one where the guy lives who's still there today. But the reason for the wood paths is because it's marshy, and especially in the winter, the water comes up and it can get really wet in there. So you need to have these wood pathways to get to these places. And that's why I think maybe in the future those buildings will no longer be around and we won't be able to see this town anymore. So it's a shame that you can't get there at this time. I love this old drawbridge. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to show you a few different views of it, so I hope you don't mind. But here's another view from the side, and you can see the railroad continuing on down and the two sloughs that are happening. Another view with a slough going through there. And then there's this really wide clear area. I don't know if it's a salt flat or what, but it's something going on there. And here's another panorama view as we swing around from the bridge and show you the town there. And that first building on the left is the building that used to have the Wingo sign on it, where the video was recorded. And I think somebody came in there a while ago, maybe in the 90s or something, and stole the Wingo sign. So some douchebag has it in his man cave or whatever and doesn't allow it to be enjoyed by the rest of us. So now I'm going to head back to the pump house, and I'm going to head out on the railroad here just to show you that. And then we're going to head along the flats here. And you can see this brown stuff. It might look like it's surface, but it's actually deep water with stuff growing on the surface. That little line there in the foreground is the actual road that goes through. And there's some telephone poles going through here with some wires. And that is the pump house right there. So we're coming up on that. And we're going to come back with a drone there. And that's my hiking point. And then from there, it's just a matter of hiking back to the car, which is parked at Larson Winery. And don't forget to stop at the Larson Winery and buy a bottle of wine if you can. I had a great conversation with the guy there and learned a lot of information about what's going on. Well, folks, I guess I've got to kind of head back with my tail between my legs, not able to hike all the way to Wingo. I'm pretty convinced now, since I'm out here at kind of low tide, that road is no longer usable. And I wasn't able to find that information online, interestingly. Maybe some other time of year, or maybe an ultra low tide, it would be possible, but I don't think it is now. So you might ask, well, then how do you get to Wingo? Well, there is another way, and that goes through a little town called McGill, California. My understanding, however, is that that's private property, but as I'm driving back, I'm going to give that a try, just to see what's going on there, just so I can let everybody know whether or not it's possible to get to Wingo. Fortunately, I was able to get the drone to fly over there. So I'd like to thank you all for coming along on this interesting adventure. It didn't turn out as I had hoped, but still pretty cool. We got to see the marshes and the wildlife areas and see what's going on with this Wingo thing. So until next time, thanks for watching.